If you're a worship leader or a church sound tech, then you know how difficult it can be to achieve a great mix for your worship ministry. In this video, I interview Kade Young with Collaborate Worship, and he shares a ton, and I mean a ton of practical advice that you can begin to implement in your worship ministry this weekend to help achieve a better mix and a better overall sound at your church. My name is Jake Gosling with churchfront.com, an online resource for innovative and creative church leaders. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can receive all of our latest content to help you grow yourself and grow your church. I recently had Kade Young from Collaborate Worship on the Churchfront podcast. Link to that podcast session below if you rather listen to it rather than watch it. In our session, Kade shared a ton of practical advice on signal flow for mixing your worship band, as well as setting the right gain, setting EQ, compression, building a mix from the ground up. And then we also talk about one of the most popular sound consoles for churches, the Behringer X32. Kade actually has an online course that gives you a step-by-step walkthrough of how to use the sound console for your church's worship ministry. In the description below this video, I have links to different parts of our interview so you can skip to whatever topic you are most interested in. I also have links to where you can check out Kade's website, collaborateworship.com. You can check out his online course for the Behringer X32 as well. So without further ado, be prepared to learn a ton of practical tips for achieving a better mix at your church. Here's my interview with Kade Young of Collaborate Worship. Kade Young, welcome to the Churchfront podcast.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here.
Man, I came across your content with Collaborate Worship. I don't know, I feel like I've seen it at least for a couple of years now, and I was like pumped the first time we got to meet up, just not meet up in person, but meet up online over Zoom a couple months ago to just kind of to just chat and get to know you. And I'm really excited to introduce you to the Churchfront community. If anyone doesn't know you, probably a lot of folks have heard of you, or they have heard of Collaborate Worship, because it's such a great resource for worship leaders. So thanks for taking the time, man. And especially I'm excited to just hear some of your knowledge and insight on helping us achieve a better sound in our churches. That's such a common pain point. I mean, me personally, that's something I'm so passionate about, achieving a good sound in our mix. I'm like almost maybe too anal about it sometimes, but like it just matters, because I feel like as worship leaders, we can spend all week long prepping our worship services. We can spend so much time rehearsing with our bands, and then if it's not mixed properly, like all that work is kind of, to me, it just all seems like meaningless, because it's like the overall sound, like it's not going to connect well with the congregation. So I'm just pumped to hear what you have to share to help us all out in that area of our church ministry. So first of all, I just want to get to know you more, and I want the Churchfront community to kind of get to know who you are more. Just tell us about how and when did you first get involved in worship ministry?
So I started as a worship leader. Actually, I had like no intention of becoming a worship leader. And I can remember one day sitting in church, I think I was 15. And it was almost like the Lord like spoke to me audibly. He's like, I want you to lead worship. And, from that point, like I was like, okay. And the most logical thing for me to do was to start a youth band. Our church didn't have a youth band. So that's where we went. And we started introducing all the latest music, from Hillsong United. You may remember like Take It All, songs like that. We loved it. The church was a little more traditional. They were still like doing Shout to the Lord and stuff like that. And so they weren't really excited about what we were doing. Actually, I can remember, one time somebody took me out in the church hall after worship, and he's like, what you're doing is not godly. Like this does not honor God.
Oh man.
And dude, if I wasn't so like on fire and like, at this point, like I just believe like God's called me to lead worship, so I'm doing it regardless. So that didn't really shake me too much, but that's just kind of the environment that I was in starting out. And so, after youth band, I got married really young at 18, and my dad came to me, like 9 months into marriage, and he's like, I'm going to start a church. Do you want to come lead worship? Sure. Yeah, I'll do it. And so we started a church together. I think we started with like 12, 15 people, something like that. And amazingly enough, we had like a full band on the first Sunday. And from then on, because I'd been like in band in high school and choir, and so I had all these musical friends. So I rounded up all my friends and said, "Hey, come lead worship with me." And so I mean that's what began the journey. I didn't know anything about sound whenever I started, and the sound sucked. Like, it was just loud and probably really annoying to people that came in. I'm surprised that they even kept coming, but I mean that set me off on the journey of I wanted it to be better, just like you were saying earlier, Jake. Like, you just have this passion. You want the sound to be the best that it can be, so it's not a distraction during worship. And that's what I've been doing the past, 11 years, is improving the sound. And now we have that sound. We're a small church. We're about, 100 people, but we still have that sound that when other worship leaders come in or other church leaders are like, well, how did you get such a good sound in such a small space? And it's 10 years of learning, 10 years of trial and error. And that's what I teach on Collaborate Worship.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more too about the backstory of Collaborate Worship, because now it's helping and resourcing thousands of worship leaders globally. You just have so much great content on there, sharing on your Facebook page, and now you have courses. But how did that get started?
To be honest, my worship leader friends here in my community were asking me the same questions over and over. Kade, how do you get it to sound like this? Kade, how do you do that? And I honestly just got frustrated with repeating myself. And so I was like, I'm going to put it online so they can read it themselves and implement it themselves. And so I wrote a few articles, put them online, showed my friends where they were. I didn't really expect it to go anywhere. And then luckily I had Google Analytics tagged onto the site. And I got on there like 6 months, 9 months later, and realized that like over 1,000 people a month were coming to the site. And I'm like, well, what's going on here? And I was like, I wonder what would happen if I wrote every week. And so I wrote every week. And, now today, 5 years later, there's like 30,000 people coming to the site every month, reading what I have to write. And I really just wrote all this stuff because I don't want other worship leaders to have to go through the same trial and error process that I did, because it's really time consuming. So my goal in Collaborate Worship was just write it, get it out there, and other worship leaders can learn exactly what I've learned like 100 times faster.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I appreciate the something being born out of like that desire for efficiency or not wanting to repeat yourself. Like I don't know, I just that's sort of what I've been applying now that I've been creating content with Churchfront, and I have members on my team and working on develop other worship leaders. I can be like, oh, like you need to learn how to do this, this, and this. And like I made a video and a blog on that topic, or a podcast you can listen to. And it's kind of it's sort of like creating content out of laziness because you don't want to keep repeating yourself. But dude, that's awesome how it just like took off. And I think you're right. Like so many people are using Google to search for help in the area of worship ministry. It's probably how I stumbled across you at first, is coming across one of your articles. So thanks so much for what you're doing with Collaborate Worship, and keep up that great work. And today I think the most, probably one of the areas that you can help deliver most valuable to the Churchfront one of the areas you can deliver the most value to the Churchfront community is in that area of church sound. I mean, you have articles on all sorts of things and products on different things, pertaining to sound, or even like keyboard patches and stuff like that. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I think one common pain point that I hear from the Churchfront community is just like how do we like train our sound guys? How do we get the sound to be better in worship? And like I said, to me, the sound person, the soundboard, they are like extensions of the worship team. They're not their own thing. But where do we start? How do we, at our smaller churches where we don't have a full-time staff member who is a professional audio engineer, with all the formal training and all that stuff, like to mix and make it sound, record ready or whatever, or perfect. What can we do in our smaller churches when we're working with volunteers in our tech ministry to help really just enhance the sound and just really reach the potential of what we can do, even with the current gear and equipment that we have? So I'll let you take it away. Be our guide. Help us on our journey of trying to find better sound for our church.
I think that like I've traveled to a lot of different smaller churches in my community because they want me to come in and see what's going on with their sound, see if I can fix it. And it seems like the recurring problem is that these smaller churches are overcomplicating sound. Like they they think they have to have compression on everything, EQ on everything, and all this other stuff. And what they get is like this big mess. And so then they bring in a volunteer that doesn't quite know anything about sound, and they look at all this stuff and they don't know what to do. And all they know what to do is move faders, or maybe they see the EQ and they just start making adjustments because they think that they're supposed to make EQ adjustments, although they don't really know what they're doing. And then it goes into like they feel like they have to fake it. They feel like they have to prove themselves. Like, I have to be good at sound, so I have to pretend like I know how to use EQ, or I have to pretend like I know how to use compression instead of just leaving it alone. So when it comes to getting great sound, I think the first step is to not use what you don't understand. Like, if you don't understand EQ, if you don't understand compression, if you don't understand gating, don't even turn it on. Keep it simple.
That's great. Yeah, it's like, but there's so many pretty buttons and knobs and like especially on these newer digital boards, like these cool like graphic illustrations of like what's going on. And I think you're right. But it's so tempting. Sometimes we feel like a button is there, a knob is there, a parameter is there. That means it must be adjusted. So if we're, I mean, what would be the best step then be for us as worship leaders? What would be the best step for us to help get our volunteers to a place to at least start learning the basics? Or maybe we can even talk about some of those right now. Like, because I think I think that folks could listen to this podcast session and forward it on to their sound guy and hopefully take some valuable tips away from just basic mixing principles, without having to worry about some of the more advanced stuff. So how would you maybe outline, if you were to get, say, if you wanted to mix in a vocal part into your board, like, what are the steps for maybe signal flow that you would recommend prioritizing that are going to help you just get a better sound out of like your worship leader's vocals?
So the first thing is that great sound starts at the source. So I would start by making sure that my vocalist was singing out, not being shy or whatever. And then I'd actually try a couple of different microphones on the vocal, because believe it or not, like one microphone will sound better on a vocal than another one. I'm not saying you have to try like 10 different microphones. I usually have like 3 on hand. The good old Shure SM58. There's the common Sennheiser microphone, and also have an Electro Voice, which I don't think I've used that one in a while. I usually just stick to the Sennheiser or the Shure. But I'll just, like, especially like when I'm bringing on a new vocalist, I'll be like, here, sing in this mic, and then sing in this mic without any EQ, without any compression on that channel, and just figure out which mic sounds better. Because the better that you can get the sound coming from the source, the easier it's going to be to mix. And so, from that point, the next step is to set the gain properly. A lot of smaller churches don't understand what gain is. They think it's another sort of volume control, and it's not that at all. It's a regulator. So everything that's coming to the board is emitting a different type of signal. So your keyboard may be a little bit louder than your guitar, and each vocalist kind of sings a little bit differently. So what gain does is it enables you to regulate all of those signals before they travel through the rest of your mixer. And if you know how to set gain properly, like, it's going to improve your sound tremendously, even if you don't do anything else. If you just go through your board and set gain the right way, everything's going to sound a whole lot better. So just to walk you through how to set gain, it's pretty simple. If you have the Behringer X32, right next to that gain knob, there's a level meter that shows you what's happening. And so what you're going to do is you're going to adjust the gain until it's hitting like that -18 mark, which is where the green lights meet the orange lights. And you want it to be consistently hitting that point while the vocalist is singing or while the guitarist is playing. And it's really that simple. And you go across the board and try to get them all hitting about that -18 mark, and it's going to sound a whole lot better.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to even like stop there, because I feel like you've already raised a good point about this sort of, I don't know if the right word is maybe minimalistic approach to mixing sound, where if you're just getting the basic fundamentals right of like having a solid sound source, even just like getting the gain set right, like, you're probably reducing a lot of other signal processing that down the road that you'd be trying to do with that signal to make it sound better. But in the end, it's not really helping. If you just like actually use the right microphone, that person would sound better before it even gets to the soundboard. Or if you set the gain right, you probably would have to do less with dynamic processing with compressors and gates and all that stuff, and then maybe even EQing. So that it almost sounds like it's just, it's a less is more approach, but also just start with the very fundamentals of like, what's the sound coming to the board in the first place.
Yeah.
So what do we do, and what do you do after gain?
So after gain, probably the most important thing is EQ, and EQ doesn't have to be complicated. Like, it's definitely like in the church overcomplicated. A lot of times just adding a low cut filter, which is also sometimes called a high pass filter, is all you need. And speaking of that, I recommend that you add one on every vocal, somewhere around 120 hertz. You may have to dial that up a bit if your room's real lively in the low end. But I mean, just adding a low cut filter to vocals, whoa, like it cleans up the mix tremendously. Have you found that to be true? Yeah,
for sure. Because like a lot of these mics, I feel like they're built to have a little bit of a boost in like the high mid range, like where the vocals already are, maybe at like, was it 4, 5, 6K or something like that. And then, so you don't even have to do much boosting up there. And then it's just like, if you just get rid of like that low, mid and below muddiness, like it just cleans it up so much. And that's another, like, I think a common myth about EQing is people are like, oh, I need to boost these certain signals like all over the place to try to enhance them. It's like, no, it's like you try to find what the treble signals are. And for vocals, it's not gonna, if it doesn't sound crisp and clean, it's probably because you have too much low mid and low muddiness going on there.
That's so true. And like, to bring the importance to the low cut filter, I was actually at a conference a few months ago called Mix U, which is like Andrew Stone from Church on the Move. And then it has like several other guys. Like, I think there was a guy there that mixes for Chris Tomlin. There was a guy there that like mixes for Elevation. So it's like these guys that are mixing at big churches and big venues. And one of them said, he's like, if all I had was a gain knob and a low cut filter, like I could get great sound. That just blew me away, because like I've always known this to be true, but I was like, maybe I'm oversimplifying this. So to hear it from one of the big guys, like I was like, wow.
Yeah. Well, especially because when you think about the technology that goes into microphones and stuff like that today, like you're generally speaking getting only the frequencies you need from those microphones, because Shure, Sennheiser, they're putting millions of dollars of development into making that the perfect device for capturing the human voice during singing, right? So it's really not, it's not rocket science, that's for sure. Well, they've done, I feel like they've taken care of all the rocket science for you, and it's like mixing it into the board. It could be as simple as cutting out just the lows on those frequencies.
Yep, for sure. It's a lot simpler than you think, and you're right. Like, the mic is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So,
yeah.
When it comes to go ahead.
I was going to say one more thing too, because folks may be listening to this and maybe they have an analog board at their church, and like all the stuff that Kade is sharing right here, even if you don't have a digital board like the X32, like these principles can still be applied to your analog board. Like, you can just to get a low cut on your analog board, maybe if you don't already have like a knob for it, you can just set the frequencies, usually for whatever your low, I don't even know what some of the language is, but like for the low EQ, there's usually a frequency selection and there's a gain selection for that frequency. So I would say, like you said, around 100 to 120 or something like that hertz. Set the frequency selector to that, and then take the gain for the low, and then just turn it down, and then just figure out what's going to sound good. You have to kind of like experiment while you're there. But I just wanted to mention that too, because I think a lot of these things that we're talking about, especially so far, gain and EQ, that can be taken care of even on an analog board just as easily.
For sure. And that's where I learned all of this, was on an analog board. So you can definitely do it.
Yep. Cool. Then what else about or do you have any other tips about EQ that you want to share while we're on this step of the signal processing flow?
When it comes to EQ, I've noticed that a lot of times it's just like one filter that you have to add to fix the problem. And like you said earlier, like the focus here is you're finding what needs to be cut. You don't want to like find things that need to be boosted. I'm not saying that you'll never boost something, but like the go-to solution should be, okay, what do I need to cut out of here? And a lot of times, and like I know like all the toms on the drums and a lot of times in the vocals, you're having to cut somewhere between 400 and 600 hertz, because that's where things get muddy and kind of boxy sounding. So, I mean, that's a common filter that I'm using, is cutting out that 400 to 600 hertz area. not all the way, but until it sounds nice and clean. And then another tip on the vocals is sometimes you can boost like above like 10 kilohertz, like that super high stuff, to make the vocal kind of sound airy, sizzle a little bit, and really poke out of the mix. So that's just a bonus tip there.
No, I love that. I do that same exact thing on our vocals and in our band. It's to me, it makes a huge difference. It just really helps especially if you want your vocals to really cut through the mix and have that crispness to that, so people can just like, hear, because people need to hear the vocals so they can hear the songs being sung and they can sing along. Boosting those highs just really, really clarifies it a little bit. I mean, not overkill, but maybe just a couple decibels. Whether maybe it's like a little, is that a high shelf, or what's it called? That when it kind of goes up and then straight over, and you can boost it like that.
Yep, high shelf.
High shelf. Cool. Great. Then what about what happens after EQ? What's the next thing we should be concerned about?
So, earlier I said don't use things you don't understand, but I'm not saying that you should never use them. You should go on a journey to understand these things. So like once you understand gain, once you understand EQ, I'd say the next step is to dive into understanding compression, because it's almost impossible to get your vocals on top of the mix and keep them on top of the mix without using compression. Because a lot of times, and I know that probably everybody listening to this has experienced that time where you had your vocal up like in a quieter moment of the song, and then when the song gets louder, they get buried. Or maybe you brought them up to hear it and then the vocal really starts belting and it just like blasts everybody out of the room. And like using some light compression on vocals can really solve that issue. Have you noticed that to be true in your church too?
Oh yeah. And like, I think that's one thing that is a really obvious difference sometimes between like something that's mixed well, in a professional way versus like an amateur mix. Like if you ever hear a recording of yourself like singing or playing guitar and it like sounds just awkward, like even if you're singing on pitch, like everything else is fine, but just from a volume level, things just seem like it's all over the place and it seems really unprofessional. Compression is a great way to just like level out the sound. And that's why like you listen to, your like professionally produced music and you'll notice like dynamically, and by dynamic we mean like volume wise, like it just has a very nice consistency to it. And when we apply that to our vocals in worship, it just sounds a lot better. I don't know why, like that's what our human ears need to hear, is that when vocalists sing with a kind of quieter, softer tone, we still need to be able to, and it still needs to be loud enough to hear, but then when they start belting stuff, we need to reduce it so it kind of just like levels out the whole volume playing field or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, love compression. So dude, I think that like covers, I mean, we could go on and keep talking about different sound. People want us to keep going on, but I would say it's like, if you can just figure out gain, EQ, and compression, like you're going to be on your way. Maybe adding verb or stuff like that that's pretty simple to do, but don't but don't overdo it with all those like delay and stuff like that. Heck, for some rooms, you probably already have enough natural reverb going on in there that you don't even have to add a whole lot. So those were, I mean, I would describe those like the basics like that we would have to master for sound mixing. And what else, like as far as just like maybe even backing up to the bigger picture of how we approach sound, like what other advice like do you have just to help like tech volunteers or help worship leaders guide their tech volunteers to a place where they really are willing to like grow in this skill, learn more, and just to help bring it to the next level? Like what's your word of advice for, again, worship leaders wanting to talk to their sound techs, or if a sound tech is listening to this?
So what comes to mind is like, I'd love to walk through how to actually create a mix from the ground up.
Yeah.
So I love to just go to the mixer Sunday morning and pull all the faders down. And if that scares you, then go do it, because you need to get over it.
Yeah.
What this enables you to do is really like actually listen to what's going on. Because a lot of times if we walk in and like just leave all the settings the way they were the previous Sunday and like try to mix from there, like it makes it hard to figure out, like, is the guitar causing this problem? Is it, what's really going on here? So I like to bring those down, and like you got to start by like building the foundation of your mix. So you kind of like bring up the bass guitar so that it's giving you the energy that you want in the room. And then you bring up the kick to marry in with the bass guitar. And, then at that point you can bring in all your foundational instruments, like keys, whatever it is, everything except like that lead instrument. Get all those kind of mixed together and sounding good in the room. And then you bring up that lead instrument to kind of sit right on top of those background instruments. Then it's time to like bring in your background vocals, and then you bring in that lead vocal at the end to kind of bring it right at the top of the mix. Not too loud, but you want to be able to hear every word that they say. So that really helps you to like just what's the keyboard doing? Like, and so you bring things up one at a time so you know what's going on and you know what you're listening for. Mm-hmm. I've seen like a big mistake like with church sound techs is that they don't really know what they're listening for. So whenever they're sitting in the room, like trying to diagnose a problem or diagnose what doesn't sound good, they don't even know where to go. Like it could just be as simple as like your guitar is too loud in the mix, but they don't hear it because they don't know what the guitar is playing. Mm-hmm. So bringing everything down and mixing it one by one, I really think that'll solve the problem and really make mixing a whole lot easier when you can learn to understand and pick out those different instruments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another tip I always like to share with my sound guys is to like know the music too before you arrive, so that like you're maybe listening to it on planning center, so you're just familiar with what should be more predominant, like instrumentally, vocally, who's singing lead versus harmony. Like that's where sound techs have to have a sense of musicianship too, to be able to balance out those things properly. Because if someone's singing harmony but they think it's the lead part, it's gonna be very misleading for the congregation trying to follow along. Or if there's a cool guitar solo but you didn't know it was there because you didn't listen to the recordings ahead of time, it's not gonna be there. It's not gonna sound right. So that's another tip too. But I think, like you said, especially if people have good monitoring setup, where like if your musicians are on in-ear monitoring, like you can go through as the front of house mixer guy and like you can cut everything out and like start building it up one by one, and the band can just keep doing their thing, practicing, because they'll hear it fine in their ears, and they'll be able to build a solid mix that way.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely show up knowing the music. That's actually how I learned to mix. You kind of brought that up to my remembrances. Like I can remember sitting like in my room by myself and putting in some earphones and listening to a song, and I'd listen to it one time through and only listen to like the kick drum, and listen to it again and only listen to the snare drum. And like I would dissect it instrument by instrument until I trained my ear to be able to hear the different things that were going on. Because I mean, sometimes things are so background, like the keyboard's really mixed in the background, but it's there. And if you just take time to like focus in on it and listen to it, it trains your ear to hear those subtle, intricate parts that really make a great mix. So I would recommend doing that, especially like if your worship team's introducing a new song. Take some time that week to listen to that song several times through, focusing on one piece at a time as you're listening to it.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about gear, and specifically about a piece of gear we've already mentioned in this conversation a couple times, the Behringer X32. Tell us, for folks who don't know what this is, what this mixing board is, or what the benefits of using it, like give us a little bit of background and an explanation, like what is the X32, and I mean, why do you even have a course on it? Like why is this something that it seems like a lot of churches are interested in for their sound console?
The main interest comes from its affordability. Like it's pretty much the most affordable mixer on the market, or most widely used affordable mixer on the market. Mm-hmm. Jake, I can remember when it came out, I was not a Behringer fan. And so people are like, the X32, I'm like, no, it's Behringer. I'm not even going there. And so I kept using my analog system for several years after it was released. And finally, like I'd heard enough good things about the X32. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give it a shot, see what happens. Yeah. Dude, I love it. Like it sounds so good. It's not your average Behringer product. Like in the past, like if you bought something Behringer, it may work, it may not work. It may be noisy, it may not be noisy. But the X32 is kind of an exception. Like it's just a great Behringer product. So I would recommend. Go ahead.
And I want to give a little context too for folks. Like the reason Behringer changed, I think it was back in 4 or 5 years ago, they acquired Midas, which is like the company that creates some higher end sound products. Like you can drop like 20 grand on a Midas sound console. So what happened is Behringer was this bigger company, it acquired Midas. So now you have the affordability of Behringer combined with some of the higher quality components of a Midas sound console. So, which you're right, because like I thought the same thing when I heard about Behringer. I'd seen like an old digital Behringer board before, and every time I was like, I came onto the X32 and I was like talking people into like, we should get this, like, and if they knew anything about sound, they're like, oh gosh, it's Behringer, like, no, we can't get that. It's like, just look at the dang thing. It's significantly different than any other product that they've produced. Like, it's not that like old cheap silver looking Behringer piece of gear anymore. Like, it even aesthetically looks like it's a different product, but granted, anyway, so I think you're right. It's like such a great option for churches because it meets that capability, and affordability component that we need.
Yeah, for sure. And like if you look at the price of it, like some churches may even still have a hard time like going digital, because what is the X32 now? Is it like $2,800 or something like that?
I think I want to say, I'm going to look it up to make sure. I want to say it's down to $2,000 for,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, so you look at $2,000 and like maybe you could get an analog mixer for like $1,200 or right around $1,000. So you're looking at that $1,000 difference, but with that, you're getting like the ability to put EQ on every single channel. Whereas if you want to do that with an analog board, like we're talking about parametric EQ, where you can really dial things in. With an analog board, you'd have to get an outboard EQ unit for every single channel to be able to do that. And by the time you purchase all of those, I mean, you're way more than $2,000. So the features that you get in the X32 and the price that you pay, like you can't beat it.
Nope. Yeah, it is. I'm looking here, brand new on Sweetwater, $19.99. So it's so
That's
affordable.
sweet.
And the cool thing too is like that's for the full X32 version. You can get the Behringer X32 Compact, which is the same exact ecosystem, smaller hardware for $1,200. You can get the X32 rack, which is just a rack mounted version of it. That's $1,000 brand new. So that's just like incredible, the price point. It's like what's happened with our phones, like we have supercomputers in our pockets now, that could, well, unless if it's like the new iPhone, they're relatively affordable, but it's just cool what technology's doing, even in the sound world.
Yeah, I mean, and granted, like I think that everybody is kind of understanding this digital mixing thing. Like if you're getting a new mixer, I'd hope that people are only looking at digital now.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're not, if you're that church that's going to get a new mixer right now and you don't have that great of a budget, then get the X32. Like just make it happen.
Yep.
If you have more money to spend, maybe get the M32.
Yep.
What it is it's the same exact software that's running in that thing, but the hardware is a lot better and it'll probably hold up longer. I know you have the M32, don't you?
Yeah, I have the M32R, and it's like the compact rack mountable version, but it also has the faders on it, so it's like half the size of the regular M32. At a previous church, we had the full M32. At this church plant, we have the small one, and it's just like I just love the ecosystem because you're not just buying like a good soundboard that's affordable, has all this functionality, but it's also like super easy to learn, like especially if you have the guidance of like one of your courses, and then it is also like you're buying into this cool ecosystem of different things you can add on to it. So like you can use like their digital snakes, which are super affordable. If you don't want to get a digital snake, it still has analog inputs on the back, so you can switch it out with a previously analog board. And then like for monitor control, like we used to have the Behringer P16 digital monitors for our church. And like, that's okay, especially for like maybe a permanent church install. But for us, we're setting up and tearing down. I just don't like digital personal mixers. To me, it's antiquated technology. Like now with the capability of either wireless in-ear systems or just getting wired headphone systems from like a headphone amp, which is like super cheap. I spent like $248 on the Behringer headphone amp, which takes the outputs from my Behringer digital snake, comes out of the headphone amp, and we have like 25-foot or 50-foot long headphone cables, which are like $5 on Amazon. So we'll just buy a bunch of them in case if they go bad. But we can run those to our musicians for in-ear monitoring for like super cheap in-ear monitoring system. And then they control it from their phone because the board and the whole ecosystem has that wireless control. So I don't know. I'm an evangelist for the X32 ecosystem, and like don't think that your church is above using something like that. My friend who runs sound at Red Rocks Church, they have like, he's running sound for the Littleton campus, has like 3,000 people every week. He's like, yeah, we use this like whatever, it's a $15,000 like Yamaha CL, whatever it is. That stuff's above my pay grade. I don't even know the model numbers for it, but it's like we use this, but it's like I could pretty much achieve just as good as a mix with the X32 in this situation. Is there a higher probability the X32 is going to fail on you compared to a $20,000 mixer? Probably, but the chances are still pretty slim.
Yeah, I've been using it for three or 4 years now, and it hasn't failed on us like during service once. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. The only thing, the first X32 board that I worked with, this was like right when they first came out, when it was brand new in 2012. Like some of the motorized faders started kind of glitching where it just got like seized up. And that's part of the deal where like you do get what you pay for. But that was also like their newest product, and I haven't seen a whole lot of those complaints out since then, because I think they probably have been able to develop it out to be more reliable, because they probably heard customers like me being like, hey, the fader just went out on this. Like the channel still worked, especially if you control it with an iPad, which is another cool feature of it too. But yeah, this podcast is sponsored by Behringer X32. Not really, but like I feel like they're genuinely, I'm like just pumped up about products like this because it's like so affordable but so capable at the same time. But
hey, tell me this: have you done a virtual sound check yet with the X32?
Yeah. I mean, that's another cool feature. It's like you record multi-track onto Pro Tools or Logic onto a computer. 32 channels of recording, and then you can play it back through those channels on the board to mix it. The virtual sound check is so cool. I love it.
Yeah, super cool.
Great way to practice. Yeah, great way for your sound techs to practice. And like, of course, it's a little bit different when you do have live drums and band members on stage, but it's cool to hear what's actually just coming through your PA system doing that virtual sound check. So, dude, we could continue to talk all day, but I want to give folks more specific direction on how they can follow you, but even more how they can learn from you more about sound, running sound for their church and really bringing it to the next level, especially if they go the route with the X32 or if they already have the X32.
Yeah, so with the X32, I created a course for learning the X32. And the reason I did that is whenever we got the X32, I jumped on YouTube and was trying to learn how to use it, and it took forever. Like there's some great videos on YouTube, but they weren't planned out. So, I mean, you're like kind of having to wait for them to get through their little intro and their little outro. And like, I'm sitting at the church, like with limited time to figure this stuff out. And I'm just like, come on, get on with it. So I created a course to, I fully scripted everything out, cut out everything they didn't need to know. And like, you can learn the X32 in like less than an hour if you want to, like if you're really digging in and getting in there. I mean, and there's like some like small things, like you're trying to name channels, and like for some reason on the X32, they call that a scribble strip. And you're like, so like whenever you first turn on the X32, you're trying to figure out how to name a channel, and you're looking through the menus and you see scribble strip, but you don't know what that means. So you just keep looking. Yep. And then you finally figure out that's how you name a channel. So, I mean, stuff like that I go through in the course, so you don't have to waste time trying to figure it out. Yep. So, I mean, you can find that course. There's two different ones. There's an essentials course, which is just, all the basics of the X32. Then there's what's called a mastery course, and that's all the essentials plus like all the advanced features, like how to do a virtual sound check and things like that. You can find both of those at collaborateworship.com. And even if you don't have the X32, I have lots of posts on collaborateworship.com on how to mix sound. Like they're not all geared towards the X32. Like there's all these principles on how to mix. Like it doesn't matter what mixer you have. Even if you're still using an analog mixer, you can jump on there, read the blog, and really begin your learning process, or just use it to aid your learning journey as you're going through and learning this stuff. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome, dude. And you're right about like, we can find, a bunch of free information online, on YouTube, on Google, like it's all out there. You could just get the owner's manual for the X32 and probably learn everything about it. But the beautiful thing about online courses, and like I offer online courses as well at Churchfront Academy for other topics, but it's like taking all that information and then just really giving people a nice, concise, step-by-step process, because your time is valuable and you don't want to waste it trying to do this research on your own. You can if you want, but it's just going to cost a lot of your time. So I'm just really grateful for that course. I've been in it myself, worked through some of your modules already, and I just love how like straight to the point it is. Like, great. And then now I can go show this to the sound guys at my church, and they can begin applying these principles as well, because they have no clue. Like, I mean, they look at the board, it's like, oh my gosh, how do we do this? And like, it can be really intimidating, even with a user-friendly board like the X32. But when you have a guide there to help you, like what Kade does in his course, it makes it super, super simple. So, Kade, thank you so much, man, for your time. I think there's so much great, valuable tips folks can pull away from this session on how to improve the sound at their churches. I want to encourage everybody, like, go to Kade's website, follow him on his blog. You're also on YouTube as well, and Instagram. Just search Collaborate Worship. He's not a hard guy to find. Oh, Facebook too. Constantly putting out great stuff on Facebook as well. Go follow Kade. Check out those courses and get started on improving the sound at your church today. So thanks so much, Kade. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, Jake, thanks for having me on the podcast. And I got to say, like, ever since we met back in January, I've been following you on Church Front. And, dude, you're killing it. Like, your Instagram stories are, like, crazy entertaining. So, you Church Front people out there, if you're not following Jake on Instagram, like, you got to go follow him on Instagram, because it's awesome. Jake, you're doing a great job.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. Boomer and I put a lot into our Instagram stories just to add 30 seconds of value to people's lives. Once or twice a week. So.
Dude, I can tell, and it adds value to mine. So cool. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Kade of Collaborate Worship. Kade, thank you so much, man, for just all the practical advice and tips that you shared here with the Church Front community on the YouTube channel and on the podcast. Make sure you click the links in the description of this video to follow Kade and to learn more about his course on the X32 digital console. If you found this video helpful, please hit that thumbs up button and share it with your other friends in ministry. Don't forget to subscribe to the Church Front channel so you can continue to receive all of our latest content to help you grow yourself and grow your church.